Okay, so today I'm going to show you Maya basic interface, manipulation, things like that in terms of keyboard and mouse shortcuts, just to try to get you familiar with the Maya interface. So the first thing to understand about Maya is that there's multiple modes of operation. So you'll see that under this pull down here: modeling, rigging, animation, effects, rendering, and then customize. Modeling and rigging are probably the two that you'll end up using the most, and then maybe animation if you end up creating custom animations for Unity or things like that. Effects, probably not. It's more particles and paint effects. You might end up using that if you're trying to paint textures for characters or maps. And then you'll see the same thing down here where we have tabs. So you have curves and surfaces, which are NURB surfaces. We're probably not going to use those. Those would be kind of more vector-like mathematical objects for creating shapes, like the sphere like this. And you can see it's got kind of an infinite amount of curve. There's no polygonal. Well, there is a polygonal. It has to be tessellated, but that's just based on the redraw of the set for the graphics card. The thing is that this is really hard to, if you right click on it, you'll see that all of the objects to edit are vertex, patch, surface points, isoparms, and if you select like a control vertex, suddenly you're editing this sort of envelope that allows you to create these squishy surfaces, which are useful, but it's not... and they can be animated in Maya, but that's not the way games work. Games don't use NURBs, they use polygons. And you could also model something in NURBs and convert it to polygons, but then you may end up running into polycount issues, and you're also going to end up having no UV maps with this. So in general, I avoid NURBs for any kind of game development or virtual reality. Then you have your polygon options, which are the same tools, but you'll see if we create another sphere, suddenly we have a bunch of poly faces, and if you right click, you'll see it's got edges, vertex, vertex face, faces, UV maps, UV shells, and if I select a vertex, it behaves the way I would expect it to in terms of being able to edit the object. So that's polygons, and then you can get into sculpting polygons, which would be sort of like clay-like manipulations, more painted, where you sort of paint strokes and it modifies the shape that way, which is good for kind of organic characters. We probably won't get into that in this video, but I have other videos that have that kind of manipulation in them. And then rigging and animation. So you can see already there's some redundancy between this and the tabs that are going on here. So there's multiple ways to find things. We'll go back to polygons, since that's probably what will be showing you most. And then on the left side here, we have manipulation, kind of global manipulation of objects. So transformation, this would be like paint stroke. This would be selection. This would just be point and click selection. Rotation and scale. And then down here we have options for different window setups. So we have a 4x4, which would be top Y, front Z, so you see that each camera view is selected. So if we create let's make it something that we can actually tell the difference with. So a torus, this is our perspective view, this is our top-down view, this is front, and this is side. Which can be useful for manipulating things so you can see what's going on all at the same time. So if I select a vertex here and then I pull it out, you can see I'm moving it towards the front based on the manipulation. So you can, without having to look at the little XYZ axis here, you can tell that from the side I'm obviously pushing it forward, not back. Then you also have a hypergraph, or actually this is a kind of a hierarchical object selection. So we have our torus and then our light sets. So this is for like our scene description. Then you have for animation, you have your animation curves. If we keyframe something along the timeline down here, it'll show up. So let me make a little manipulation. So let's set a key. You can right click right here. No. Keys. Yeah, convert to key. Nope. Somewhere around here I can set a key. Under our animation window, go to key, set key, which is S on the keyboard. So then I get this options here for all the different kinds of ways I can manipulate that key. And if I move it here, pull out on the timeline, and then do another set key, you'll see I've got an animated curve. And if I drag across the timeline, oops, got to set this one. Suddenly I've got a key graph, so that as it moves, as I drag across the timeline, I've got an animated keyframe. And then if I want to manipulate that, then you can select any of these options. So I can change the scale over time. So if I wanted to change from here, we can jump to the next key. If I want to make it scale bigger, like that. Notice that the scale graph suddenly changed, and I can see it separate from each other's scale. Now, since I scaled them globally, they're all going to be the same curve. If I wanted this one to sort of go, I could take and drag this keyframe in the opposite direction and make it get squashed, and you can see how that starts to manipulate the way the scale occurs. And then suddenly, when you drag it, you see a sort of squash like that. Anyway, we're not going to get into animation. I just wanted to show you that part and show you that these windows have a bunch of different options for basically looking at windows and organizing your interface. The next one would be, that was the keyframe, so the panel layout for keyframe animation. This one is for shader tabs, if you want to, when we create materials. And then here is a 4x4 for animation, or a 3 view for animation. You have your animation graph down here, and then this is actually a hypergraph, and we'll get into that later. And you can have other options as well. So we're going to go back to just our perspective view. I'm going to go ahead and delete this object, which will delete all my keyframes. And let's see. Oh, we also have, let's go ahead and add another object, cube. I just added it from the polygon menu here, or you can go under create, polygon primitives. So again, more redundancy, and I could create a cube from that. You can create lights, cameras, curve tools, whatever. All right, so we have this cube, and the way I'm manipulating the cube is I'm holding down on a PC, it'd be Alt mouse, Alt left mouse to rotate. And you notice that I'm rotating, so if I move over here and when I rotate, suddenly the cube's rotating. If I want to focus on this cube, I can go under the actual panel window and select View, and then look at Selection right here. And that'll center the cube, and then suddenly when I'm rotating, I can see it, and it's centered on the camera view. And now if I hold down Alt and right mouse, again, we have to, for Maya, you generally want to have like a 3-button mouse, or 2 buttons with a mouse wheel, because you can always click on the mouse wheel. So for rotation is Alt left mouse, zoom is Alt right mouse, and then panning is Alt middle mouse. And if you hold down the button, you'll see the little cursor change. Now for a Mac, let me bring them up here. It's different. So since Macs can have a single button, 2-button, or 3-button mice, these are the shortcut commands for that. So it'd be the same except for Option with the mouse buttons for a 3-button mouse instead of Alt. And then for a 2-button mouse, it'd be Option plus Command. So Option left mouse would be rotation's kind of always the same. But then for a 2-button mouse, it'd be Option plus Command. And then for a one button mouse, it'd be Option plus Command plus the mouse button, or Option plus Control plus the mouse button for dialing around, zooming in. So Mac users, you'll just have to learn how to do this. Just play around with the Control Alt or Control Option and the mouse button, whichever mouse you have, to get it to work. And it's good to become familiar with sort of like just having your hand over your keyboard and being able to manipulate and move things around. Once you kind of get used to it, it kind of becomes second nature, and you'll be really good at, and you can model fairly fast. Let's see. So that's, other ways to view the scene. So in your window, you've got all of these viewport options: shading, lighting, showing, what you can hide object types, rendering viewport. You'll want it set to viewport 2.0 as long as your graphics card will support it. Otherwise, hopefully it'll default to legacy, but if not, the thing that's nice about the viewport 2.0 is it's more like a game engine type of rendering, and it'll actually let you see shadows if you have lights in the scene. And I'll show you how that works. So let's go create polygon primitive, actually not polygon primitive, light, and we'll make a directional light. So I just created a little directional light here. And you can't really see how this directional, I'm just moving it off of the object so I can actually grab it and manipulate it easier. You can't see how that's affecting this object right now because I don't have viewing of the light or the effect of the light turned on in the scene. So if I want to do that, I can turn on, use these options. So right now we're set for just smooth shade all. This would be use the default material, which won't show the light, but if we had a material on this object, it would show the texture. And this is for showing the object itself with outlines, which can be useful sometimes to see, make sure you're not manipulating any poly, or sort of actually help to see the shape. And then this is seeing the actual light, this shade mode right here, textured, which is also with light, and you can turn on shadows as well. And there's the light effect. So I've got, you can see it either just shaded with the light effect or textured with the light effect. So let's go ahead and put a texture on here. Well, let's go ahead and continue with the lighting before I go in that texture. So if I rotate, I just hit R to turn on the light's rotation. This is on the keyboard. If I hit W, that's for manipulation. R is for scale, E is for rotation. I don't know why it's otherwise, but you can see as I change the light's direction, suddenly the lighting changes on the surface. And then to make this a little bit more obvious, since we're casting shadows, I'm going to move this up to the grid plane, and then I'm going to add an actual plane below the cube. So polygon, I want to create a plane, and it's just created a little 1x1 plane, so now I'm going to scale it up. And suddenly you can see I've got this shadow cast here with the light, and as I change that, the shadow is going to change on the so this is useful for, it's not great for modeling necessarily, but it is useful for when you're setting up a scene to get a more realistic view and sort of tell how your lights are going to light the object if you're going to do some rendering. Otherwise, you really don't really care about this. If you're just creating a game model, it can be useful for sort of checking the game model for topology issues, but this is more for if you're going to render in Maya. Let's see. The other thing this brings up is as I manipulate this light, you'll notice that every time I select something, this channel box over here is changing. This is the channel box, so you can see I've got the option. It basically is exposing the channels that can be manipulated for the object. So you can see where the scale of this object is 1x1x1, and it's right now translated on the Y where I moved it up to the surface to 0.499, which isn't quite on the surface. If I make it 5, which is half of the 1, then it should be flat. Flat on the surface. And the same thing for rotate. I can also select each one of these channels and manipulate them. And if I want to manipulate them precisely, I can just type in a number here like 0.25 or 35 or 4, and it'll rotate it. But I only rotated it like a slight degree. You can see where I barely rotated it. So let's make it like 34. Suddenly I rotated it on its x-axis, which would be going through the side of the cube, and I rotated it down into the ground. I can change that back. I want to rotate it on its y-axis, which is, as you can see down here, going up through the top of it. Should rotate around kind of like it's on a pole. Then I can do like 45, and it'll rotate flat around. Another way to do this manipulation is if I select the actual channel, and then if you have a 3-button mouse, you can middle mouse drag in the window with that channel selected, and you can manipulate it that way. Or you could just grab the icon here and manipulate it that way, or the manipulator. And that's the channel window. So the channel window is controlled by these, what appears here on this right-hand menu side is controlled by these little icons up in the corner. So this is the show hide channel box. This would be show hide tool settings. Now, if I click on this, it's going to appear on the left, just because for some reason that's the way it's going to work. You can select your tools over here, and it's going to show you all these different tool setting options for each. We'll get into that more later, so I'm going to hide that for now. But the one that's the most important for being able to view options on the object is this little show hide attribute box here. And what you'll see is it's this object, this cube, is actually a nested set of a bunch of different manipulations. The base object is this pcube1, which is just an empty node with some translation functions on it, kind of like a parent object. And then there's the actual shape object, which is the pcube shape that has a bunch of options for it, which is just the mesh here. Then you get this polycube manipulator on the base object, which allows you to change, the way the object got instantiated. So width, height, whatever. Now, if you change this object, if you manipulate these edges or the points, vertices, whatever, in any way, and then you go back and try to manipulate this, it won't work. So if I go and I take this vertex and pull that off like that, that's fine. That's what we're going to end up doing a lot of when we go to model. But now if I go and I select that object and I try to change this width setting, it sort of works, but it's not going to scale the way it would otherwise. And if it's a more complex object than a cube, like a sphere, it'll absolutely not work, because there's just too many vertices for it to keep track of. And the same thing with subdivisions. So when I go to add subdivisions, you can see where I did that manipulation. Suddenly I've got this weird janky edge right here, based on it not understanding. Once I've, the point that I manipulated when I did the vertex movement on that is no longer exist in the same order in the vertex list. So now it's just trying to apply some manipulation on a random vertex. And it'll get even more worse when you try to add even more types of subdivisions. So if you're going to do anything with the base descriptive object, this manipulator on any of the base shapes, like the sphere will have its own polysphere that'll allow you to change the subdivisions and things like that. Do that before you do any kind of vertex manipulation. Let me go back. I'm just going to undo. So if I do, I've got it back to the base shape. If I go and I change the vertex or the subdivisions now, then once I say, okay, yeah, that's enough, then I can go and take and manipulate a vertex point, and it'll hold up just fine. Okay? Just something to be aware of. And it's generally smart, if you're going to do any box modeling, to kind of lay out the topology the way you want to do it before you go in and start doing any heavy manipulation like extrusions or things like that. We'll get into that in a sec. Let's see. Also, too, you'll notice that everything that I'm working with is a quad, and that's just because quads are easy to manipulate. Normally, if you imported an object into this, it would end up being triangulated. So we'll go to Modeling, Mesh, Triangulate. And this is what, everything ends up getting triangulated in a 3D world. And the problem is, okay, now I can still manipulate this, but if I go and I want to select a face, I can't select a flat face. I have to select both of the triangles of the face to do any kind of manipulation. And which isn't too big of a deal, but it just means a lot more selection, and on a complex model that's a lot more. So generally work with quads, and even if you import an object as a base object or whatever, I'm trying to undo to get to the back to my quads. There we go. You'll want to work with quads if you can, just because it's easier to select faces like this to manipulate. And that's useful for box modeling. So if I go and I want to do sort of an extrusion, I can select this flat face and just extrude an edge off of it. We'll get into that in a sec. Let's see, what else? So the attribute editor. So for this attribute, we've got the polycube description. Then you've got a shading group, which is basically just a way of a kind of a group container for materials. You'll notice it's got a surface material. It says Lambert 1, which is the default material that comes up on everything. It's going to be the same on this plane as well. So if you want to end up applying some material or shader to this and changing it, like putting a texture on it or whatever, and you don't want that to be also applied to the plane and every other object that doesn't have a custom material applied to it, you need to right-click on this, on the object when it's selected, and go down and assign a new material right here. And it'll bring up a window that allows you to see all the different types of materials you can apply. In terms of game engines, the game engine is going to apply its own material and try to translate from one of these. The one that will work best probably is this blend. So when you apply that, it still looks exactly the same. But you'll notice that when we applied it, it changed from the Lambert shading group to this blend shading group. And it brings up all of these options as long as the attribute editor, this little window right here, not the channel editor. Notice the channel editor still only allows you to do translation and rotation, but this will actually give you access to everything associated with this cube: the parent object, the shape, the polycube manipulation. So if you want to change the subdivisions, and then finally the material descriptor. So this blend. So let's call this, change it to cube matte. And you can always change the type from here, so you can change it back to a Lambert, Phong, whatever. Blend is just is kind of the most advanced. Phong could also be considered pretty advanced. There's more advanced than that in terms of rendering for Maya, but this is all we need for game engines. What it'll be is, you'll notice that if you look at this sample of it, it's got like a little tiny speck right here of shininess. So if I change this eccentricity option, it will change you'll notice it changing here in the window. Maybe I'll make this a sphere instead, just so you can see it a little bit better. The eccentricity. Now it's got the Lambert, you'll see, applied to it because I just created a new object. If I want to assign that blend that I just created, assign existing material, this cube matte. Now it's not a cube, so we can go and change that to now sphere matte. Doesn't have to be called anything, but just for the purposes of readability and being able to track your materials if you got it into the game engine. You'll see now I've got this sort of shininess to it. It's kind of dull, but if I change the eccentricity, it becomes sharp and pointed, which is more metallic. And then you also have the specular roll-off, which is kind of the amount of specularity it has. I can crank that all the way up. So now it's a more metallic-like object, which would shine like a plastic or a metal. If I want it to have a metallic reflection, it actually has a reflectivity here, and they all come in and set at 0.5. So it means if you were going to render this in Maya, it might end up having like some reflection and you might not want it to. So I generally will set it to 0 unless I know for sure I want it to be reflective. Metal will almost always be reflective, and it's not going to be like partially reflective. It'll be completely reflective, and then you'll control how reflective by the actual specularity of it. But also too, a metal could be kind of a rough surface reflectivity, and that might put it somewhere in the middle and blur it. We'll get into materials in other videos, but so anyway, these are your settings in the attribute editor for your materials. You have your color settings, so if you want to make it red, just click on the little channel here and you can select a color. Now we have a red material. Notice it didn't change the floor because the floor is the default material. If we want to apply a texture to it or some other kind of procedural material to it, you can click on these little checkerboard materials or icons next to each one of these settings, and that'll add a map to it, a texture map. So when you click on that, you come up with these render nodes. If you wanted to add a picture, you could click on this file, and it's going to bring up another attribute. And over here in the attribute editor, you have image name. You can actually look for one. So let's see if I can find a picture. We will go to, by default, it'll go to whatever the default texture map or your default project folder is set to. We'll get to how you set that in a second. It's going to one that I worked on previously. So it's sort of is set to search whatever the default project folder or the project settings folder is. But for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to show you just any texture. So we'll go to pictures. I don't have any. Let's try. Just trying to. All right, here we go. So yeah, that might work. This will be interesting, actually. All right, so you see how now we have a texture on our material, and it's just mapped across the sphere. You can also see there's sort of a specularity still. Let's go back out. All right. Change the eccentricity a little. Okay. So now we have a texture map on there that's mapped to the material. And again, if you apply this and you don't have this checked, notice it made the texture disappear. You've got to set the viewport to render the appropriate material attribute you want. So this is your shading, this would be your texture map, and then this will be your lighting. So notice it's cool because it allows you to change the view. So for some reason, like the shadow or the light function kind of makes it hard to see what's going on the back side of this texture here. It can be useful for setting up your scene to get the lighting situation you want, but it doesn't really work for modeling purposes. So you can just turn the light effect off, and then you'll be able to see everything and check your UV maps. So one thing you should notice is, like, see how the zero is getting pinched at the surface? That's because it's a sphere. And if you look at the UV maps, go into UV editor under UV for modeling, you'll notice it's because these the UV shape, let me turn off display image on this. These faces aren't squares, they're triangles, which is just what it takes to draw the pole on this. At the same time, even if they were squares, they'd still get pinched because they'd be pinching to a point here. And that's just something you're going to run into on pretty much any polygonal sphere. Let's see, what else with the interface? All right, so I've done a lot of this right mouse clicking on the object just to get manipulations, so let's go over that. So right now I'm in vertex edit mode. So, or you can tell because it turned blue. If I want to just manipulate the entire object, right click and select object mode. That's it. Just right mouse click and drag. If I wanted to manipulate edges, I just drag to the edge, and then suddenly I can manipulate these edges. If I want to drag vertices, I can do that. If I want to do faces, I can do that. So for the purposes of box modeling, faces is probably generally what you're going to do in terms of manipulation. So if I wanted to select faces to say like extrude, you can select the faces you want to edit, and then you get up under modeling here, you get this mesh. So you get all these mesh Boolean options and ways to fill holes and triangulate and things like that. But then you also have edit mesh, and there's a bunch of useful options here. It's like bridge, collapse surfaces. So if I do collapse, it's just going to take and remove that and pull all those objects together without changing the UV map as much as it can, which is useful. Let me undo that. So if I wanted to do extrude, I could select that. You notice it pops up this poly extrude manipulation here. And as a default, it comes up with this manipulator that's on whichever face I selected last. If I grab that and pull it off, I get this extrusion off of the surface that's part of the object. And this is the way box modeling works. I could scale it as long as I keep this. As long as I leave it in this mode, I can do all these manipulations to this widget tool right here. As soon as I deselect it though and try to select it again, now I'm back in my object manipulation mode, and all I can do is the general global manipulations like that. So let me go back and get back to my... Okay, so this is like my pre-extrude mode where I did an undo. So another way to get it extrude, and this is a really useful tool, is this little hammer and box tool over in the left. That is your modeling toolkit, and that's, you're going to want to have that open when you're doing a lot of box modeling. And again, you can see you can get access to any of the edit modes here, just like if you'd right mouse clicked and you did it from here. Right now we're in face mode. You can do combine, separate, smooth, Boolean, same things you would get at up here. And you can do components, extrude, bevel, bridge, add divisions, multi-cut, things like that. We'll get into what those are in a second. So if I want to do an extrude from here, I can have this toolkit open and just hit extrude, and I get back to my manipulator. I can mess with the widget, or I can do it from this. I can change it this way. You can go in or out. If you go in, it looks like you've created a little divot in the surface, which is useful for like windows and things. And the other cool thing is that if you do it, you can go undo, and you'll be able to change whatever the last manipulation you did was. You can do local translate, which is the same as thickness. Offset, which kind of scales. Divisions, which is nice because you can change the number of divisions, which will kind of create kind of a bridging effect. And one that's really nice is this keep faces together. You notice that when we scale it, it extruded off this face and it kept these edges together, kind of sewed them together. If you change that, and we change the offset back to 0, notice that now they're separate. Which is useful for creating spikes or pipes, tubes coming off of objects, things like that. And you can always change that back again as long as you don't deselect this. Once you make a manipulation and you click off of it and you try to get back to it, you can't. It's gone. That manipulation's gone. Let's check that just to be sure. So if we go back to our edit here, so we've got this polysphere again, so we don't get to, here's our poly extrude. we've got that. So we've got divisions. See, can't do anything. Notice it's messing around with this. That was our poly extrude from the top here. It doesn't have our poly extrude that I can tell from. Notice it's got every manipulation we've done on the object in this tab now. And these can build up over time and actually make it really hard to clear things out. So once you've got an object the way you want it, and you don't want to keep all of this history, you can actually go to Edit, Delete All by Type History. And that's as long as you don't have animation. So if you have animation and you do this, or rigging, if you do this, it'll actually delete the rigging. If you want to delete everything about the object but keep the rigging, you can delete non-deformer history. Now you'll notice in our attribute window we're just back to p-sphere shape, and then the sphere material. And we've got our little widgets here that we pulled out. Okay, what else? We've covered these UV mapping. What else? We've covered our material. Windows, editors, mesh tools. I think that's pretty much it for interface. Just to kind of keep it going and show how box modeling works now that we've got the interface down. If you're going to start, let's say we want to model a house or a building. I'm going to get rid of this plane since we don't really need it, and it might get in the way in terms of selection. I'm going to start with a box. Box modeling, always start with a box, or any kind of modeling really, even characters. Because it's just easier, and the UV mapping is easier to manipulate after the fact. So if you look at the box UV map, this is what we get. It's just a little T unwrap. So I'll go ahead. Well, I don't want to apply that material to it just right now. So if we want to make a building, let's say, you can think about it a couple of different ways. There's floors to a building. Let's say we want to make a multi-story building with windows and a door. Real quick. So you could build it wall by wall, or you could just go and just construct it all from this sphere. So one way we could do it from the sphere perspective is just as going off of this, not saying we have any kind of reference material, but we just want to make something, is we could go to this polycube and change the subdivisions to floors, so they kind of become floors. But we want to have a door, so maybe we make, so there'll be a door in the center here. And then, so we probably want to do 5 on each. So notice that I'm planning this out on the model. All right. Now that I have that, let's say we want to do a door here. Let's take this. This will be our door entry. We can go to our modeling toolkit. We can do an extrude. And we're just going to pull up these edges here to kind of create a door step. Like that. The reason that I'm not taking this into the surface just yet is I'm going to use this edge to create a cornice around the door. You'll see how that works in a sec. So if we want to make the step to the door just a little less, we can grab just that edge and pull it down. Now if we select these faces, we can do another extrude and pull those in. And that becomes the beginning of the door. So let's say this is a modern door and we want to have like a split down the middle or something, or glass, I don't know. Now let's just take both of these and do an extrude. I feel like Bob Ross trying to make these decisions. So let's make, this will be like an aluminum edge on the door. And then there'll be a glass set window in here. So we'll do another extrude. Now we could also just say, well, let's just make a hole and we'll create a door so we can actually open it and things, but we'll get into that in a minute. We don't have to do that right now. So let's say the ground floor here is storefront. So it'll have these big windows to it. So we selected all 4 of these. Make sure we don't have any. Yeah, see, I accidentally selected this edge down on the bottom. So when you're I did it on the door too. See how I ended up creating this. So let's go back, and I may not have enough undos. Okay, we're back to. I have to go back to is like the very first selection that I did. There we go. All right, so we're back to selection. So when you do a selection in box modeling, number 1, select, but make sure you don't select anything outside of the selection that you want to actually mess with. Otherwise, you're going to end up getting extra polygons and edits that don't make any sense. It's also the reason why my manipulator wouldn't work correctly, because it was trying to read between 2 different objects. All right, so we'll do another extrude with the selection, and we will make the door. I'm just going to pull this back, and we'll actually make the door part of the. We'll make another object for the door. So for now, I'm just going to delete that face, and that'll be our entrance into the building. Now we're going to make some windows. Alright, so it's going to be storefront. I'm just making sure I don't have anything else selected. Do an extrude, and we'll pull them in. So we'll give it a bit of a raise off the ground, so it's going to have like this brick surface or whatever. Sorry about my dog barking. Yeah. And I'm going to make them centered a little bit more, like that. We'll give it more of an edge over here. Alright, and then extrude, again, back into the surface. And this will be our window. And then for windows above, we might end up doing something in these. So we'll make this one mirror across. So that brings up a good point. Let me go back. I want to show you how to make things mirror across this object. Okay. Let me make sure I've got. Yep. Okay. I was just checking to make sure I was done, that I did still have the extrude on. So if I want to mirror manipulations across a face, in this case our, which axis are we on here? The Z-axis or the Y-axis, going left to right. You want to go to your tool edit, so this little hammer menu up here, and we're going to turn on symmetry. So the symmetry that we want is if I select a face here, we want it to be symmetry. Is it across? Yeah, across the Z. So whenever I notice now I'm getting this mirrored symmetry across the object. That's useful. So we're going to select just one side. We'll do our extrude. We can change the, let's see, thickness, no. Divisions, nope. Offset, I believe. Yeah, there we go. And I'm left mouse clicking on the offset and dragging here. Because what happens is, for some reason, our manipulator goes haywire whenever we do symmetry. So once we get this extrusion going, though, we can select and just on this left, we can then scale and it'll manipulate across the axis. So I'm pulling that into position. Yeah, something like that. And then we can do another extrude. And in this case, then we can pull it back into the wall and we'll delete that face. So now we have our mirrored windows across. And we'll do the same thing. We're going to create some windows that'll sit 5 windows across the face here just to create that building look. So extrude. And again, we'll play with the offset here. Yeah, it's kind of sensitive. So let's set it to like 0.05. There we go. Same thing. We'll do 0.05, extrude, offset. And this one. So this one, if I try to manipulate it, because it's on the center axis here, having symmetry turned on may be a problem, but let's just try it and see what happens. So extrude, 0.05. Okay, it worked. So that'll be the beginning of our windows. If we want to make them bigger, we can just scale them a little bit bigger, like that. Just kind of eyeballing it here. So now if we want to extrude them into the wall, we can select them all and then extrude, pull them back, and then delete them. And maybe we want some so one way we can do this too is if we want to select all of these and we do an extrude. So normally this would extrude together, but if I turn off keep faces together and then do my offset 0.05, I get them all apart that way. And then I can go and just manipulate each one to create kind of a narrow window across the top. Notice that because I'm doing this manipulation with all of them selected, they're starting to scale weird off the axis. But, because I want them to be in line with this window. So what you'll have to do is select just the mirrored symmetry ones that you want and scale them so that they stay aligned. And then the same thing here. Then I can select them all and extrude them back. Delete. So that's call that the facade of a building. Not great, but one of the things we can do as well is, I was talking about creating this little cornice here. Extrude. I'm just going to pull it out like that as an edge. That might end up becoming like a different material. Then we might take the roof. I got to be careful how I select here because I'm starting to select the back face. Let's make sure I haven't made any manipulations. Yep. All right, so if I select a face and I double click, it'll select across the whole thing. But if I select 3, actually let's do it this way, 3, and then on the third click, it'll just select that line. Notice how it's selected around. So this is a way of getting around creating like edge loop manipulations where you're doing faces, but you have to make sure that you give it a direction you want to manipulate, and on the third then double click, and that'll create like a click or a selection all the way around as far as it can try to select, because when it gets to these extrudes, suddenly it doesn't know how to continue the selection across the geometry. But it's a nice way to do edge loop or extrude face loop editing around like a character or something without having to go and manually click every single edge. So for this, I'm just going to select the top, make sure I didn't select anything else, okay. And we'll make a roof for this thing. So I'm going to do an extrude. I'm going to make it scale out. Actually, I need to turn off symmetry for a second since I'm trying to do the whole object. And if I try to scale from the left, it's going to scale, kind of crash in on itself. So I'm going to turn symmetry off and hit R. And that should scale it then out. Yep. So kind of an edge loop hang here, and then extrude and go up like that. And then we can do another. So I'm going to kind of create a one of those, I don't know what you call it, like an edge that kind of tapers up off the top of the building. Extrude. Something like that. Then we'll do another extrude. I'm just hitting G here to repeat the command. So we're going to create a ledge and then another G to extrude and go down. And that'll be the ledge, the top of the roof of the building. And you do the same thing to create windows on each side of it. So now we have this model, but the problem with the model is that it's looks like I did get some sort of a edge face here. See where I can get these weird, yeah, I've done some extrusions that didn't. I'm going to delete the base because I want to show you how to kind of create a shell. Delete. So now, oops, again, I accidentally deleted the side here. Yeah, delete. And then let me go in and delete these. All right, now we have this hollow building that is fine, but the problem is that game engines tend to render only forward-facing faces like this. So if I, just to mimic what you're going to see if you did this in a game engine, if I go under shading and turn on back face culling, notice that, let me hide this selection. Notice that now my building seems to have this weird transparency from certain angles, and that's what's going to happen in a game engine. The other thing is you may have a brick on the outside of the wall here, but you're going to want painted walls or wallpaper or whatever on the inside. So, especially if you have transparent windows or things like that. So, in order to fix this, what I can do is just mimic this edge here inside the building. So, let me do that. Let me turn back, just for the purposes of getting this done quickly. Turn off back face culling. And I want to sew edges together. So from, let me think about this a second. The number one thing is, let's do it this way. I'm going to delete these ledges here. Let me go to, accidentally saved. Just crashed. Let me open it. We'll go back and quickly recreate that. I accidentally real quick, create cube R attributes, attributes, polycube shape, 5, 5, and 5, 5, 5, and 5. Yeah. Then we'll go to face. And for the purpose, let me think about this a sec. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll create these edits. I'm going to just create the windows, and that way I won't have to make the ledges, so we can do it right the first time. But I would show you otherwise how to delete those ledges. But basically, what I wanted to do is when I created this, let me make sure I didn't get any selection there. When I created this extrusion, and I wanted to add that, I wanted to be able to delete these edges, right? So what I was going to do was go to a top view and go into wireframe mode, which I hit 4 to do, and you can see these edges here. So I could just select all of these faces. Now I've got every single face selected, including the ones through the wall here. I just deselected those by holding down Alt and clicking again. And now I just have that interior loop selected, and I can delete that. And I was going to do that across the entire surface. But what I'm going to do real quick is create that initial wall condition that I had. So let's turn on symmetry, which was through my tool settings. I'm going to turn symmetry on the Z, I believe. Is it Z? Nope, wrong. X, yeah, X. Depending on which side you're trying to edit. So we'll do the extrude and change the offset. I'm just going to do it real quick by the numbers. 905, maybe 0.5. Okay, and then do the same for these. Hold down Shift and extrude. Turn off the keep faces together and make the offset 0.5. The problem is if I don't keep the faces together, then it'll also split it down the middle. Yeah, we'll undo that to keep faces on, which is going to make one big window. So we can undo. I'm going to have to do these individually. So again, planing, extrude, 0.5. Extrude 0.5, and then this one. I'm not being super careful. Normally I would check to make sure I hadn't selected any, but I haven't, because it can select through. Now, since we're just doing one and we don't have to worry about a split across the middle, we can select all of these and do an extrude. Turn off keep faces on and make it 0.5, like that, and we'll delete those. Same thing for these and these. Okay, and then we'll do our door, extrude 0.5. This isn't the way, it's not 100%. Maybe like that, and then delete. All right, so now we have these holes. I'm not going to do the roof just yet because I don't want to have to deal with it for now. If we take this object, the entire object, and let's see, extrude, or actually duplicate it, so Control D. Now I've got two of these, I'll show you. So I've got two boxes, right? I can take this and put it inside and offset and then reverse the normals. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to go to the top. The first thing I want to do is just pull in the edges a little bit. Take the vertices and drag just a little in, a little. These didn't mirror because I'm doing it across this axis. And then we'll go to the top and just pull make sure I didn't select. Yeah, I did select this bottom of the door, but that's it's not okay. The same thing here either. So actually, yeah, I've got just that part selected, so I can pull that down for the ceiling. And then on the bottom here, I need to, let's go into wireframe mode and select just this bottom edge, not the actual door part there, and just pull that up for the floor, just a little. Now, if I select the entire object, and this is something you'll have to find in the menu, but under mesh or mesh display in the polygon, the modeling view, mesh display, this is where you see your normals. And normals is basically just the way, the actual average angle of each one of these faces in terms of the way it's pointing. So the way Game Engine's optimized is if a normal's facing away from the camera, in other words, it can't be seen, they just turn it off. That's why you get that single-sided rendering going, and it can cut the number of polygons that are rendered in a Game Engine by a large degree. So it's an effective optimization for rendering. But in this case, what I want to do is this will be the interior of the building and this will be the exterior. So I want this to face inwards. So I'm going to take let me make them just to show you the effect as I do it. Turn my shading back to backface culling on. So now I'm rendering only the outward facing polys. I want to set this and reverse it and render the inward ones. So I'm going to take mesh display and then reverse. Suddenly I'm rendering the inside, which is what I want. So this will become the interior of the building in terms of faces. And then I'll pull that back inside. Now let me get it centered just to make sure. Okay. Now I want to select them both and combine them. So mesh, combine. Now it's all one object. Now the issue is that I've got these interior edges and things, but I don't have them connected yet. But since I just combined them, I can connect them now. I'm going to show you how to do that. So if you select by edge, and then this back facing edge, like that, I can do this bridge tool, which will bridge across the edges. And suddenly now I have the face that combines the two, and they're sewn together. For some reason I can't select these back facing edges, so I have to keep rotating in and out. Bridge again. Do it for the bottom one. And same. And we may want to turn the light. Oh, we don't have a light because I crashed. Let me turn on a light so I can get a difference in the shading here. So create directional light. Pull that out. Give it it some direction, and then turn on my lighting. Yeah, that way we can actually see. Let's give it a little bit of it. Yeah, there we go. That way we can see when our faces are finished, because you can see the actual edge of it there. So yeah. And we can always check to make sure, yeah, we've got a face. Okay. Okay, so and we can take these edges. Actually, we'll do both at the same time. Select and bridge. And so we're going to get a bit of a beveled edge here, but I'll show you how to fix that real quick. Bridge. See what I mean right there? That's where we scaled. We accidentally scaled something inward, but we can fix it real quick. Before we do that though, I want to show you how to select or get the whole thing finished before we do it. Extrude, not extrude, undo. Bridge. Alright, so we've got these windows finished out. So if I just select the face, notice I've got it on both, and hit R, just grab the one and then you can scale it flat, and then suddenly you've got your extrusion fixed. Okay. Then we can go and finish out these as well with the edge loop bridging. So if we go, let's see if it'll work across everything. That would be a nice shortcut if it did. Bridge. No, it did not. And that's because it couldn't quite get the symmetry. Because I had symmetry selected, it couldn't understand it across multiple selections for holes. So you have to do them one at a time. So bridge. We'll do each window completely. Didn't have this one selected. Bridge. There we go. Outside. And we can take and select this face again and flatten it. I usually will do like 2 or 3 scales just to make sure I get it completely flat. Then we go back to edge, bridge, 2 edges, bridge. I keep missing that one. Bridge. And bridge. Oops, I didn't. Oh wait, I did do a bridge. You get these same. You can do all kinds of different things with the bridge. That'll create multiple extrusions across it and things like that. But right now we're just doing a single poly bridge. Oh yeah, because we're doing it across the symmetry here, this one we're going to get both edges. And it actually works because it's just one hole. And the final for that. So slowly. Bridge. by having this symmetry turned on, we're kind of cutting the workload in half because it's doing it on the other side as well, which is nice. Bridge. All right, so again, we've got this weird, because we scaled it, we need to scale it flat. And then we can go back to edges and finish this out. So, bridge. Bridge and bridge. It should, we got one more here. So now we have an interior and an exterior on the building, and we could go and do the roof the way we did previously. Just to show you how that the interior and the exterior can be done, just to sort of show it off, we can let's turn off the lighting effect here, and you can select faces. See how it'll select all the way around, but we don't want to select the outer faces, so we're just going to select the interior. So I'm basically just selecting all of the walls. So we might want a single material for those. And in the back facing. Of course, we also might want windows on them, but I'm not going to go through and make you watch me model those. So we accidentally got some outside poly selected. Make sure we have all of our interior ones. Again, these are all right. Now we can, just to show you how it would work, if we look at our UV map, UV editor, we've got some overlapping UVs here, a lot. So if we want to separate those out, and because they're connected, they may be joined here, we can just do UV and then use this best plane texturing tool, or automatic, even better, so it's set up sort of as a box, and it's going to project. Now we have these UVs. Let me move them over here just to show you. All of our UV planes are set up in a nice little grid, and then this one is actually another. We can just select all of these faces and do those should be the exterior facing and the floor, and we can do the exact same thing, automatic. Now we get this UV map that actually starts to make sense, and we can apply some textures to each individual UV island, which is what these individual groups are called. So if we select UV and we say it's joined up, because I've got symmetry turned on here. Let me turn on, which apparently symmetry works across UV maps. So let's go to turn off our object symmetry. So if we select just the UV, this one, and we want to just select all the UVs associated with that island, we just select one. And then if you go under select, you can select the shell, and it'll select all of those, and we can apply an individual material to that, so we can convert that selection into faces. So select convert selection to faces here. So now I just have that entire wall, just that one wall selected. And I can assign a new material, make it a blend. We're just going to give it a color. I've got tons of edit on this thing, so I'll get rid of those in a second by deleting the history. So here's the blend, and we'll make it, let's make it red. Okay, let me delete all of my object history so I don't have to go through all of that. So edit, delete all by type. Because I don't have any skeleton or any rigging on it, I can delete the entire thing, so delete the history. And, oh, one other thing. You notice I've already crashed once in this session. Save often, because, unfortunately Autodesk, depending on which version you're using, is not as stable as it used to be. So the more often you save, the less you're going to have to do rework. So save the scene as, pick the place you want to save it. We'll do a project here. Let's go ahead and just put it, there we go. And I'm just going to save it here for now. So we'll call this building. Get caps on, don't need it, but continue. So now if I lose it, I can always open this scene up and continue wherever my last save was. So remember to save and save often. Speaking of which, let's say we want this thing to be a real complex project. Let's make a whole new project folder for it. So if you go under File, and then Project or Set Project, you can select the place where you want to put this thing. So I've got this constructing moving image class right here. So I'm going to make a whole new folder, and we'll call this Buildings Project. And then from that, I can say set, select that directory and set. The location, constructing the moving as building project does not contain the project definition file, this thing. Please select one of the following options. So we want to create a default workspace. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we can set our project directory, set the project here, to that buildings project. Go within and just say set. Now when I go to save this, first we also want to project window. If we go now, we've got all of these different folders that we can create. So scenes, which would be if we save it, it'll automatically save it in scenes. Templates, images, if we save any images or texture maps, they'll automatically go in there, or we can load them from there. Source images. So it's nice to go ahead and create an entire project setup in terms of folders and things like that within your buildings project. So we're going to go ahead and say accept. And then if we go to say save the scene now, or save the scene as, notice that I thought we would be in it. Let's see. Now we can set project, or maybe it's still creating them in, set this in this project. If you look in there now, we've got a ton of folders. We'll set it here. And if we go to save, I guess it's because we saved the last one there, but you can save it in scenes, this building, so save as. And now for anything that we do when we open it up, it'll open it up from that folder. Okay, so again, if we want to go and do more edits to this, create more materials for these interior walls, UV editor, I can select by face and just drag across all of these. These are the interior facing UVs on that wall, and I can apply a whole new material here. Assign new material, make it a blend, we'll make it green. Okay, and So we can do, it's the nice thing when you have a UV map set up, it's pretty easy to make large scale changes. So we'll do this wall, assign new material, assign new material, blend, make it yellow I guess, and then this one is the back wall. Assign new material. Blue. So now we have this building sort of set up. I mean, we'd have to go and put windows and things like that in there, but now that you understand box modeling, hopefully you can understand how to set that up. That ought to get you through the basics. I may make a more advanced tutorial where we do some more advanced type of manipulations and start to apply texture maps to this and see how they tile and things like that. But for now, I'm going to save this and call this video over. Continue. All right, that's it.